Aloha, and welcome to the revised edition of my 9/11 program, which was initially produced in the early part of 2014. Before I continue, however, I must say one word of love and respect to my dear mother who passed on earlier this year. She gave me the unconditional love that every child deserves, and any good deed I've ever done in my life I have to attribute directly to her. So to you, my mom, thank you so very much for all that you did for me, and to all mothers indeed. Moving back. 9/11. This, for me, is the litmus test. No other issue provides an opportunity for us to see the depth of integrity of anybody who speaks in the public area about the truth surrounding this event. Now, I made this project early in 2014 with the expressed intent of showing whose fingerprints were all over it. And in fact, I give very, very strong evidence to support who should be indicted. We don't need a new investigation. We need to indict certain individuals because the evidence that's already in the public realm is more than explanatory. But I was motivated to actually do a second revision or a revision of the initial program because of our dear friend David Cameron. Now, like everybody else, I love a good laugh, so when I watch David Cameron or any of these other jokers, Obama, or whoever else they parade out in front of us, it's definitely worth a good laugh. One of the things I learned many years ago was never lose your sense of humor. So, David Cameron gave a speech at the United Nations General Assembly just a couple months back, and I've watched this entire charade of a speech, and it is very amusing. However, there are a few points that are made that are of specific interest. So what I'd like to do is show certain segments of his speech and then sort of break it down step by step. Without further ado, on to David Cameron.
Overcoming what I want to focus on today, which is the mortal threat we all face from the rise of ISIL in Syria and Iraq.
Now, the first thing that we have to say about anybody who makes comments about so-called ISIL, ISIS, whatever the hell they call themselves, is if anyone wants to speak seriously about this, whether it's a Western leader or whatever prostitute politician or pundit in the media they put out there, if these people do not acknowledge the very direct support that so-called ISIL, ISIS has gotten from the West, then they're not serious, and no one should take them serious. The fact that the West has blatantly supported our allies, Saudi Arabia in particular, Qatar, while they have been funding these mercenaries is simply indisputable. It's a matter of public record. The fact that we have provided training to ISIL in Jordan and that our good friends and allies, Turkey, have been shuttling these psychopaths across the border from Turkey into Syria, all of this is indisputable. The fact that they're running around with American weapons, the fact they're running around in Humvees, M16s, I used to use an M16, brand new M16s, all that sort of stuff is simply indisputable. And yet this joker is getting up and talking about ISIS as if we have nothing to do with it. Never mind the fact that we've destroyed several other countries in this same bogus thing called the War on Terror.
We must not allow past mistakes to become an excuse for indifference or inaction.
So this is incredible. We cannot let past mistakes. Are you talking about the mistake of invading Afghanistan and Iraq and also destroying Libya? Are you talking about the so-called mistake in which we invaded Afghanistan based on the pretext that Osama bin Laden was responsible, and yet not once has this man been indicted because even the FBI admitted they don't have any evidence linking Osama bin Laden to 9/11. So what the hell did we invade Afghanistan for? That's a pretty big mistake. And if you go back to the Nuremberg tribunals, wars of aggression are the supreme crime. People hung for that in Nazi Germany. I'm wondering why we don't have anybody hanging for the war of aggression that we fought in Afghanistan. And even more ridiculous and insane is the invasion and occupation of Iraq that is translated to the death of 1 million, perhaps 2 million, millions of refugees, millions of orphans running around without a parent or even both parents as a result of this. And then we go to Libya, in which we've totally destroyed that country. And we want to do the same thing and have largely done the same thing with our policy towards Syria. So is that the mistake that David Cameron is talking about? How easy for us to dismiss this without any Western leader having paid any price at all for any of these hideous crimes?
We should be comprehensive, defeating the ideology of extremism that is the root cause of this terrorism, so that we win the battle of ideas, not just the battle of military might.
Now, this is the amazing part of this speech, which the same theme is being carried forward by Obama and other such prostitutes. This conflation of so-called extremists coupled with nonviolent extremists with terrorists. So it looks like all of us who question the official propaganda of the state, are actually going to be deemed, or already being deemed, extremists. And as extremists, really, we're not any different from ISIS or ISIL, because our ideology, our ideas are the seed for which this violence grows. And this is a theme we're going to see more of in this speech. And I'd just like everyone to realize that it's not just the so-called extremists like myself. It's pretty much anybody out there who questions the official propaganda is, in this Orwellian 1984 world of ours, a so-called extremist.
And we should be uncompromising.
Uncompromising. This is a word used more than once in this speech. And wow, the West should be uncompromising, should it? I guess that means more invasions, more mass murder, more depleted uranium, white phosphorus, and all that sort of stuff.
Using all the means at our disposal, including military force, to hunt down these extremists.
Here again we see extremists. Extremists, terrorists, extremists, very purposely conflated.
Let me take each of these in turn. The root cause of this terrorist threat is a poisonous ideology of Islamist extremism. We must defeat this ideology in all its forms.
So here we go. Key. We must defeat this form of extremism in all its forms, in all of its forms. So, not just the violent extremists, all of its forms, including, you quote, non-violent extremists. Definitely got to fight that.
As evidence emerges about the backgrounds of those convicted of terrorist offenses, it is clear that many of them were initially influenced by preachers who claim not to encourage violence, but whose worldview can be used as a justification for it. We know this worldview, the peddling of lies, that 9/11 was somehow a Jewish plot.
Aha, here we go. This is to the heart of the matter here. We know this worldview, don't we? Like those who peddle the lie that 9/11 was a Jewish plot. Are we to deny that Jewish Mossad agents were celebrating the 9/11 attacks and filming the event while other bystanders were wondering what the hell is going on? These same Jewish Mossad agents were talking about this on Israeli television, the so-called dancing Israelis. How about the Jewish Israelis who were caught with explosives in their van? This hits at the crux. Actually, this is the motivation for doing this revamped, revitalized, and improved version of this 9/11 program, because at the end of the day, the litmus test of 9/11 is those who will speak honestly about whose fingerprints are all over this. And I can tell you the powers that be are so deathly afraid of those of us who have the courage to speak out about who is responsible for 9/11, because indeed it involves Jewish agents, including Jewish Mossad agents, including so-called dual national traitors in the United States. Many of the people actively involved in the false flag that is 9/11 are in fact Jewish. And those of us who are not afraid to say it, of course, must be called extremists, mustn't we?
Or that the 7/7 London attacks were staged.
Ah, yes, the idea that the 7/7 false flag was somehow staged. Well, let's talk about the explosives under the tube, which blew up. How did somebody carrying a backpack with explosives manage to put a backpack on the deck of a tube car and have that explosion actually come up from under the floor? That was explosives planted underneath, and there's a myriad of other things that show that indeed that was another false flag event. But again, those of us who can see the obvious must be extremists.
The idea that Muslims are persecuted all over the world as a deliberate act of Western policy.
Wow. Now this is just incredible. The idea that Muslims are being targeted as part of Western policy. Wow. Who would have thought that? Who would even suggest something so crazy? I don't know. Maybe the fact that we've targeted Muslims who were falsely blamed for this event. Clearly Muslims did not carry out 9/11. No way Muhammad Atta drinking booze, snorting cocaine, going out with a stripper. Yeah, he was on a jihad. None of these people knew how to fly these planes. They were CIA stooges running around like idiots, getting paid to go here, go there, everywhere, and be the patsies. And yet all the evidence makes this clear, and yet we've invaded only Muslim countries. We are targeting Muslims. We still have Muslims in Guantanamo. Who knows how many we've tortured and killed that we don't know about. Oh, God forbid we start looking at Western policy for what it is and actually seeing that it's targeting Muslims.
And we must stop the so-called non-violent extremists from inciting hatred and intolerance in our schools, our universities, and yes, even our prisons.
And here we go again, the nonviolent extremists. Welcome to the club if you, like me, are sick and tired of these prostitutes spouting their lies. It is an embarrassment for any of us who live in the West to see these absolutely insane psychopaths get up and talk this rubbish that they talk, and the idea that we're the extremists, when in fact it is our governments who are sending off American and British sons and daughters, along with whoever others involved in the so-called coalitions we create, to kill innocent people, including, by this stage, hundreds of thousands of children and women, defenseless people. But of course, we're the extremists, those of us who are sick and tired of these insane policies. George Orwell in 1984 have nothing on David Cameron.
Would we sit back and allow right-wing extremists, Nazis or Ku Klux Klansmen to recruit on our university campuses? No.
No, we wouldn't allow that. We wouldn't allow psychopaths who speak such rubbish to actually become prime ministers and presidents now, will we? Psychopath, pathological liars. No, we wouldn't allow that. All right, no, actually, that is what we allow, don't we?
Finally, when the safety and security of our people is at stake, we must be uncompromising in our response.
All right, so here we are again, that word uncompromising. With the safety and security of our people at stake. Well, okay, let's dissect that just a bit. You know what the odds are of actually being killed by a terrorist incident in the UK and around the world, in fact? It's roughly 1 in 20 million. Now, I want you to think about that, especially the next time you go to take a shower. Because the next time you go to take a shower, beware of the fact that you have a much greater chance of falling, hitting your head and dying than you do from a terrorist incident. But I don't see the police state being justified by the fear of people dying in the bathtub. No, I don't see that at all. But I do see everyone's rights being taken away based on an absolutely ridiculous, insane, false, so-called war on terror, in which we can violate people in the most obscene of ways, invade, occupy, torture, kill, imprison with no due process, and take away whatever rights we supposedly had under the U.S. Constitution or Magna Carta in the U.K. Uncompromising. Yeah, right.
My message today is simple. We are facing an evil against which the whole of the world should unite.
Indeed, we are facing an evil in which the whole world should unite. And it ain't who we're being told, that's for damn sure. These absolute traitors, Cameron, Obama, Bush, Blair, you name it, whoever they trot out next, these traitors have represented us. They have used your taxes, my taxes, to kill people en masse. Indeed, the evil that exists is one of which we are responsible, most particularly those of us from the United States, Britain, and Israel. This unholy alliance, this true axis of evil, these three countries which effectively have destroyed all due process of law, turned international law into nothing more than a tool of the most greedy and psychopathic leaders that exist on this planet. Indeed, this evil is something that we should all unite against.
And as ever, in the cause of freedom, democracy, and justice, Britain will play its part. Thank you.
Oh, indeed, Britain will play its part as it always does. We can count on good old Britain. And you know what? This David Cameron, I really need to thank you, David, very, very much. When such an idiot like yourself gets up and speaks this kind of rubbish, it really does serve as motivation to actually redouble my efforts and actually speak the truth, uncompromisingly, as you would say. So I want to thank the viewers for this program, because I have heard from many of you that you indeed have thought that this was the best 9/11 program that you have ever seen. I take that as a huge compliment, because I know of many great works, many great people who have spoken honestly about 9/11. So hopefully this new and improved version will attract even more viewers. And hey, maybe I'll get lucky and be convicted of nonviolent extremism in the UK.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
When I took on this show, I knew that certain issues needed to be discussed right up front. And top of the list was 9/11, because no event has affected our world, especially the Middle East, more than 9/11. But all the major players in this event have received obvious cover from the governments, academics, and of course, the mainstream media. Aside from the sycophants protecting their masters, there is a much more insidious enemy of truth known as political correctness. I will not bow to such manipulations. Political correctness is a trap, functioning as a tool to prevent honest dialogue. It fosters, if not compels, self-censorship. It is a blatant form of thought control. So when I use the word Jew instead of Zionist, for example, I do so because it is the most accurate word to describe those whose primary allegiance is to the Jewish state of Israel. To use the word Zionist, as the thought police would have of me, would deny the fact that Israel is the Jewish state, not the Zionist state. Take the Christian Zionists, which are some of Israel's staunchest supporters. They're not granted the same right of settlement as their Jewish counterparts. Why? Well, because they're Zionists, but they are not Jewish. In the end, nobody is better placed to stop the criminality of the Jewish state than Jews themselves.
Go back to where you came from. You know where you came from?
For the
You came from the bottom of the door.
peaceful dismantlement of the state of Israel. Then we can once again coexist as we have for hundreds of years. We have older rabbis who will testify lived in the old state of Jerusalem, in the old state, in the old city of Jerusalem. In the old city, they lived door by door. This rabbi lived in the old city of Jerusalem. Before 1948, he'll tell you how he lived, coexisted with all the Arab neighbors, how they babysat each other's children when they went to Yom Kippur, when the women went to Yom Kippur on the fast day, the Muslim neighbors babysat the children, the most precious objects they gave to them to protect.
Whether we like it or not, taking responsibility for the actions of our governments that operate in our name, that receive our complicity and our support, is essential to solving the problems we face. Blame shifting, on the other hand, is tantamount to voluntary maintenance of the tyranny. As for my motivations, I consider every single human being to be a brother or sister in one human family. And I want what is best for every member of my family. And I mean every member. But patronizing talk and false sensitivity helps nobody. Let there be no mistake. My greatest scorn is reserved for my birth nation of the United States, that is without doubt the greatest terrorist entity of the 20th and 21st centuries, regardless of the fact that it has been hijacked by traitors and foreign agents. So if the citizens of the Jewish state and the United States want to avoid the virtually inevitable retribution coming their way, it will be by changing their disastrous course without delay. In this sense, I am all too ironically a friend to the Jewish state and the American people, because both must face their criminal nature while they still have a chance. And to make this point that much clearer, if the situation were reversed and the Jewish people were being broadly blamed for the crimes of 9/11 when clearly they were patsies, I would be the first to stand up in their defense. Let me also extend an open invitation to Israeli, British, and American government representatives so as to challenge me on any point I make in this program or future programs, with a special invitation to Israeli spokesperson Mark Regev, who I will devote an entire program to one-on-one debate if he has the courage to take me up on it. If, however, these governments and their trolls simply choose to sling mud, you can rest assured it is because they are cowardly propagandists who could never back up their insultingly false incantations outside of the cozy confines of the whorehouses they frequent, otherwise known as the mass media. Before we explore the truth regarding 9/11, I must thank Christopher Bolin, Mark Glenn, Jonathan Azaziah, Mark Dankoff, and Xander Z. Fereza for reviewing the content of this program. They have provided invaluable input. Now, the first thing to discuss about 9/11 is the fact that this event is quite possibly the greatest mind control event in human history. Certain aspects of it are so stark, so profound, that within this historic event can be seen a tremendous gift. But firstly, let me acknowledge the obvious. While my birth nation of America has meted out more violence in the 20th and 21st century than any other entity, it does not change the fact that the events of 9/11 are a great tragedy, not only for what happened on the day, but also for the far, far greater suffering and death that has resulted from it. Having said that, the gift lies in 9/11 serving as a litmus test for humanity. Indeed, I will make the case that we have reached a flashpoint in human history that will decide the fate of all life on planet Earth, because in the nuclear age, we simply cannot sustain the collective insanity of our current path. We have come this close to nuclear annihilation many times over, and facing the truth about 9/11 can be the beginning of the end of that insanity. The good news is that poll after poll makes very clear that more and more people do not trust the official account of 9/11. Around the world, it is safe to say that the majority of people do not accept the official version of the event. In America itself, roughly half doubt or disbelieve the official version altogether. And herein lies the heart of the gift. Despite all of the mass media deception, people are seeing straight through the lies and regaining the capacity to think and process information intelligently. This is absolutely critical in the process of liberating humanity from the bondage and ignorance and division. I have often used a metaphor to describe the current state of human existence, and it goes like this. Human society has created and ultimately consented to the institutions of power that oppress us, to such a degree that we the people have constructed a massive prison that every man, woman, and child, for the most part, have voluntarily entered. We have then closed the prison door behind us, taken the key within our collective hands, and locked the prison door. As if this wasn't bad enough, incredibly, we have then handed the key to the prison door to a group of psychopathic tyrants who have all too wisely remained outside of the prison. Subsequently, we continue to beg these tyrants for the crumbs while we continue to remain locked in a prison of our own making. Now, the prison is a metaphor for our current financial system, a financial system utilized by the tyrants to control virtually every aspect of human existence. And yet, and please listen to what I am saying here, the tyrants are powerless without our consent. And while we have collectively entered this prison, we can tear down the prison walls of financial enslavement in an instant. No matter what our religion, non-religion, what color we are, what country we come from, what group we relate to, or what philosophy we subscribe to, we, the masses, have the same cause. We want the same things. We want to live a dignified life. We want a just and peaceful world. The powers that be know this very well, and that is why they must continuously divide us and rule us. The key to the maintenance of their tyranny is hoodwinking us into fighting each other for the crumbs from their lavish tables. And believe me, the powers that be revel in the madness that is our division and ultimately self-imposed enslavement. They are laughing at us. They mock us. But it doesn't have to be this way. Do you want a better world, a sane, just, and peaceful world? Well, so do I. In fact, I demand such a world because I refuse to accept the unacceptable. And while I hold the tyrants responsible for ungodly amounts of suffering and injustice and death, I cannot ignore the fact that they could not possibly have achieved this without the massive compliance from the masses, from us, which brings us back to an uncomfortable truth, which is that we are guilty to one degree or another. I want to issue a huge apology to a group to which I am not a member. Because as I will lay out very clearly, if there is one group that cannot be held responsible for the 9/11 event, it is the very group blamed for this crime, and that would be the Muslims around the world. So let me say with resounding clarity on behalf of all sane, thinking people, we are deeply sorry that Muslims have been falsely accused of the events of 9/11 and that subsequently, countless Muslim lands and people have endured the farcical war on terror. We apologize for the invasions, occupations, drone strikes, torture, Guantanamo, for all of the maiming and the death that has rained down on you. Let it be understood from this day forward, from this non-Muslim, that we know the 9/11 false flag was intentionally, falsely blamed on you so as to cultivate a clash of civilizations. We reject the war on terror in total and shall identify those responsible come hell or high water. When we return, we shall discuss the absurdity of the official version of 9/11 and, more importantly, whose fingerprints are left all over this event. The official version of 9/11. Here's a brief description of the official version. 19 hijackers, mostly of Saudi origin, were headed by a lead hijacker named Mohammed Atta. The hijackers received flight school training for small, single and twin-engine airplanes at various flight schools in the United States. These hijackers were directed by al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, who lived in caves in Afghanistan while requiring dialysis to survive. Together, they managed to outwit the entire defense systems of America, despite the fact that in 2001 the United States invested more money and resources in defense than just about every other nation on the planet combined. We were told that the breathtakingly vast defense and intelligence apparatus of America had not contemplated the possibility of airplanes being used to fly into buildings. On 9/11, there was a U.S. military defense drill codenamed Vigilant Guardian. That simulated the exact events of 9/11. As a result of this drill, there was confusion about whether there was a real or simulated hijacking, and thus 19 individuals managed to allegedly hijack 4 planes and freely roam American airspace without any challenge from U.S. interceptor fighter jets. The official version tells us the hijackers successfully hit 3 out of 4 targets on 9/11, with one airplane being brought down by heroic passengers who shouted, "Let's roll," before overwhelming the box cutter-armed Muslim fanatic terrorists. The other planes, however, hit the Twin Towers and allegedly the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. as well, which happens to be the most heavily guarded airspace on planet Earth. While none of the virtually indestructible black boxes of any of the 4 airplanes were ever proven to be recovered, including that of Flight 93, which apparently managed an intact nosedive into a field in Pennsylvania, which occurred at such a high rate of speed that none of the actual plane, fuselage, jet engine, seats, or bodies was ever recovered. However, officials did recover 2 of the hijackers' passports and a bandana, as well as another alleged hijacker's passport from Flight 11, which slammed into the North Tower, causing a massive fireball. Although just 2 of the buildings were hit by planes in New York City, 3 buildings were completely destroyed, while 7 buildings were either partially or fully destroyed. The Twin Towers almost entirely turned to dust, while Building 7 collapsed in a process that resembled a controlled demolition, with each of the 3 buildings falling at free fall speed. We are told that the destruction of the Twin Towers was caused by the weakening of the steel support columns from jet fuel fires, and that Building 7 collapsed uniformly in a free fall due to a standard office fire. This is the first and only time in history that has occurred to such buildings, steel support, steel frame buildings. We are also told that the Pentagon was hit by an airplane whose pilot executed a 270-degree banking right turn as it descended 8,000 feet, all the while managing to avoid detection of upwards to 85 surveillance cameras covering its flight path as it apparently flew directly into the Pentagon. Footage from the 85-plus surveillance cameras was confiscated by the FBI, but they assure us it was just as described. The commission created to carry out the official investigation required 442 days to be formed by a foot-dragging Bush administration. No less than Henry Kissinger was appointed to lead the investigation, and the total budget allocated to investigate the biggest crime in the history of America was a staggeringly minuscule $14 million. By comparison, the U.S. government budgeted $160 million, when adjusted for inflation, to investigate the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in 1986.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world. overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, while in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon and the Budget Analyst Office, where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her, and her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet, employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This is the story of 9/11, brought to you by the media which told you the hard truths about...
His head could be seen to move violently forward.
And...
They took the babies out of incubators.
And...
Mobile production facilities.
And...
The rescue of Jessica Lynch.
If you have any questions about this story, you are a batshit, paranoid, tinfoil, dog-abusing baby hater and will be reviled by everyone. If you love your country and or freedom, happiness, rainbows, rock and roll, puppy dogs, apple pie, and your grandma, you will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone. Ever. This has been a public service announcement by the Friends of the FBI, CIA, NSA, DIA, SEC, NSM, White House, NIST, and the 9/11 Commission. Because ignorance is strength.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty. Conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theories.
The official version of 9/11 is a terribly bad B movie. It is a massive insult to our intelligence and all too significantly reveals the depth of mind control that many in our world are subject to. All too ironically, those of us who are not so brain dead as to believe the official version are called conspiracy theorists, despite the obvious fact that the official version of 9/11 is in fact, you guessed it, a conspiracy. It just so happens to be the most ridiculous conspiracy of them all. And let us not forget these important facts. Osama bin Laden himself denied any involvement in 9/11. And before you have that knee-jerk reaction of saying he confessed to it on video, hold that thought. With regard to America's supposed need to invade Afghanistan in pursuit of bin Laden, the Taliban stated on record that they would extradite him if only the United States would adhere to this paltry little thing called due process of law, which also involves another little thing called evidence. As it turns out, the U.S. decided in favor of invading and occupying two nations and turning them back to the Stone Age. As far as the evidence is concerned, it's a sort of don't worry about it kind of thing. So bin Laden was never actually charged with any crime regarding 9/11, with the FBI stating in 2006 that there was, quote, no hard evidence linking bin Laden to 9/11. Going back to the supposed bin Laden video confession, if the FBI does not believe it, why do you? As for the supposed 19 hijackers, there is no video evidence of any of the hijackers boarding the planes, from airports controlled by Israeli security no less. Several items have been used as evidence to implicate these patsies, but these are ridiculous. As already mentioned, 3 passports belonging to alleged hijackers were supposedly recovered. In the case of Satam al-Sakami's passport, it is said to have survived the plane crash's explosive fireball in the North Tower, falling hundreds of feet to the ground and then randomly picked up by a passerby who delivered it to the New York Police Department. In pristine condition, no less, with no burns, tears, or rips, with the picture and name perfectly visible. Once again, no bodies or plane wreckage was recovered from the alleged Flight 93 crash site in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, supposedly because the plane crashed at such an incredible rate of speed that apparently everything vaporized. Nonetheless, 2 passports, a martyrdom note, and a red bandana that is said to have been worn by one of the hijackers was remarkably recovered.
There's one thing that defines everyone.